When I think about my educational philosophy, I sometimes like to compare teaching to pushing a big boulder up a steep hill. We need to push and push and push, doing all we can to get that rock up the hill. At the very end of the year, when the final shot clock has reached 0, at that point, if the rock isn't at the top of the hill, well, that should be noted. But until then, we've got to give it all we've got into the very end. We need to recognize our responsibility in getting the rock up the hill, and we need to passionately believe it's possible to get every rock up the hill. Here's what I mean. It seems like in some cases, teachers actually want to fail children. They'll say things like, these kids need a wake-up call. But that's like keeping a rock at the bottom of the hill and then berating it for staying there. We need to recognize that at the end of the day, whether that rock is at the top of the hill or the bottom is a reflection of the person pushing as much as it is on the rock itself, plus the hill and all the other rocks our rock associates with. Effective educators do more than say, I told them it, I don't know if they got it or not. Doug Lemov summed it up perfectly when he said, perhaps the most salient characteristic of a great teacher is her ability to recognize the difference between I taught it and they learned it. Part of this means reshaping what we think it means to be a teacher. Some narrowly define teaching by just one skill, the ability to clearly communicate content. In other words, some people think that if you're smart and if you know how to articulate well, you have what it takes to be a good teacher. But that's like explaining to the rock how to get up the hill without doing anything else. That might work for a rock or two, but it won't work for the vast majority of rocks. And if you believe all rocks can get to the top of the hill, like we should, then more is needed. Today's educators need a whole suite of additional skills beyond the ability to clearly communicate content. For instance, they should have the ability to invest students. Do you know, strategically, what you would do to motivate students in your class? Educators will often say, kids today just don't care. They often bemoan a lack of motivation, and sometimes they'll mention how TV, phones, computers, and tablets are zapping the energy out of kids these days, as if kids were ever naturally passionate about reading, writing, or arithmetic. But that's a whole different story. I'm willing to concede that such a philosophy is not without controversy. Some have suggested that if adults constantly push kids and push kids and push kids, then kids will never learn to push themselves. And these teachers are quick to point out that in the so-called real world, kids won't have everything handed to them, and they won't have people to relentlessly motivate them. These teachers feel like students should work hard on their own accord in order to get a good grade, or simply suffer the consequences of receiving a bad grade, much the same way that adults should work hard on their own accord in order to get paid, or simply suffer the consequences of getting laid off. I can understand this perspective, but I also know that the way we've been working isn't working, and the stakes are too high. It's not hyperbolic to suggest our very democracy is at stake. Education is a long game, so while teachers work to get students pulling themselves up the hill, they sometimes need to do most of the pushing first. Put another way, old school teachers conduct class like this. I'm going to present you the information. You either take notes or you don't. You either do the homework or you don't. You either study or you don't. If you do, you'll get a good grade and progress to the next class. If you don't, you will fail and repeat the grade. Either way, no skin off my back. I should be evaluated simply based on how well I present the information. If I am not clear or am otherwise confusing in the way I present information, I'm willing to take responsibility for that. But as long as I am clear on my end, and as long as I have everything well documented, then the performance of students is a pure reflection of them, not me. We need more than that. As an educator, I'm willing to say, hold me accountable for how my students perform. I know, of course, there are so many legitimate factors that play into my students' performance. I'm not naive enough to believe I can easily make every aspect of my students' lives perfect, completely neglecting everything they are facing. But what I can promise my students and their guardians is this: I'm not going to give up on you. I know you can get to the top of the hill, and I'm smart enough to find a way to do it. That means I'm going to work with you every single day. Our first attempt might not work, or our second, or even a third, but I'm going to keep pushing. And though you might slip a little from time to time, there's no way you're sliding back far, and I'm going to do everything in my power to get you to the top. A byproduct of this shift in mindset is a sense of urgency. You can easily spot a teacher who holds this philosophy because they'll be teaching from bell to bell, and often to individuals or small groups in the morning, at lunch, at night, or on the weekends, because they hold firm in their mind, I'm going to get you up this hill. To be clear, this desire to push students must also be paired with a desire to hold students to a high bar. Equally as dangerous as the teacher who seems to want kids to fail fail is a teacher who blindly passes out A's. I want every student in my class to get an A, but I'm not just going to give you one. You need to demonstrate to me the skills, knowledge, and mindsets worthy of an A. I'm going to partner with you and push you to get you there, but that doesn't mean I'm going to lower the hill. I had a professor in graduate school whose catchphrase seemed to be, "That ain't it." Whenever you would share a draft of your paper with him or answer a question in class, you'd always be terrified to hear those 3 famous words, "That ain't it." It drove us all nuts at first, but we soon learned to appreciate it. Part of this is knowing what a high bar looks like. What does success look like in your content for your grade level? Do you know? Once that is established, the next skill is evaluating students against that metric and not lowering our standards. Even when we've worked so hard with a kid and it seems like they've poured everything they had into their work, we owe it to students to hold them to an honest mirror, demonstrate to them where they have and have not met our expectations, and keep pushing to help them get them there no matter what. That's why I say at the very end of the year, when all the dust settles and all is said and done, if a student's performance is not satisfactory, then a failing grade should be issued. I'm certainly not afraid to give failing grades if necessary, but I don't do so easily. I do so only when I know I've given everything I possibly could have, and still we just simply couldn't get the results we needed. And even in those situations, I know that such results ultimately reflect on me. Now, there is a seemingly endless list of important skills educators need to have in order to make all of this happen. They need smart data management practices to measure strategically along the way where students are in relation to their goal and to progress monitor accordingly. They need some political finesse so that they can work with parents and guardians, amplifying the number of people pushing on each rock. They need teamwork and leadership and organization and a whole lot more. But at the end of the day, my educational philosophy is that if you assume responsibility for getting the rock up the hill and you never lower the hill, then you will surely find a way to muster all of these skills and whatever else is needed to make it happen. All of this talk of pushing hard should not be mistaken for burning yourself out. I don't actually believe that teaching requires anyone to be completely self-sacrificing. Moreover, I see self-care, and even more so time for rest and reflection, as more than just nice to haves for teachers. I actually think they are essential practices that benefit students as well. After all, muscles don't grow during workouts, they grow in the rest periods following workouts. Oftentimes we develop brilliant insights for our classroom when we take time off outside of the classroom, and we become happier, healthier, more efficient, and more effective when we get enough sleep, spend sufficient time with our loved ones, and pay adequate attention to our overall well-being. Now, part of my philosophy is working hard, no way around that, but my broader point is one of our mindsets, and that can absolutely be achieved with an appreciation for self-care. This isn't a call for working around the clock or forfeiting ourselves for our students. I simply believe that educators today must lose the pretentious mentality that kids ought to know work ethic and self-actualized instinctive motivation by kindergarten. I believe it is fraught with uselessness to suggest kids need to learn to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And I believe holding a grudge with a child is about as useless as holding a grudge with a rock. Rather, if we emphatically believe that all kids can learn, and if we become passionate about our subject and grade level, and if we know how to hold a high bar for students, and if we assume responsibility for getting students to achieve at that high bar, then we can build up students, transform schools, and support entire communities. So let's start pushing.